We have all forms of resilience, but this time today, we'll be discussing something special, and this is how communities respond to disasters. So this is quite literally very, very corresponding to our theme this semester, and we're very lucky to have Maryam here with us. So hope you enjoyed the talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello everyone, good afternoon. As I was introduced, I'm Associate Professor of Water Systems Engineering. When I was contacted about the seminar, I felt it's an exciting opportunity. It's a great honor to be here. And also at the same time, this is a topic that is very close to my heart. I gave it a lot of thought that what can I discuss in the Department of Architecture about the subject. It is such a broad area and has evolved since the start. The first time I started focusing on this topic and carrying out research. It has changed a lot and it is very broad. So a lot is happening in terms of challenges globally we're facing, different communities responding in different ways. In my view, it's very important we share these challenges, we share the opportunities, and we can learn from each other. This is very, very important. So communication, collaboration is key and at the heart of it. This is what I have learned over the years that I'm going to share with you some of those experiences over the years I've learned. So I decided today, I focus on a few projects that I have been involved over the past, I would say 10, 11 years. I learned a lot working with different people, different disciplines. I came out of my own bubble, basically, and collaborating with different communities, different places, nationally and internationally, listen to them and learn from them. So what I'm going to share with you today are a few insights from those experiences. Hopefully, you find them also insightful and informative. Before we begin, can I gauge the expertise in the room? Are you all from Department of Architecture? So are you all architects? Engineers? But what background you? Brilliant, planning and architecture. I'll come back to that actually. I have a few things to highlight and point out. So as I was introduced, I'm a civil engineering background. I've got my PhD in water systems engineering. I don't put any year over there, just in case you don't guess my age. From Center for Water Systems in Exeter University. Currently, I am the lead of a research group called SHORIT, Sustainably Resilient Infrastructure and Communities at Anglia-Ruskin University. I'm the chair of International Water Association's Alliance on Water Sensitive Design and Planning. It's a global North and South collaboration focusing on this topic. I'm a member of the CIWEM, Chartered Institute of Water and Environmental Management, advisory board member of the DEFRA-funded Catchment to Coast project, which looks into coastal erosion and flood resilience using nature-based solutions. And also I'm the advisory technical board member of the Environment Agency funded NEEN Water Management Strategy. And finally, I am currently coordinator of the International Disaster Resilience Network at Anglia-Ruskin University. My expertise is very much focused on water infrastructure resilience, but I would say wastewater side primarily. And in the past few years, I'm very much focused on sustainable drainage system, blue-green infrastructure, and nature-based solutions as means of adaptation. I'm sure in the past few years, in particular, we all have seen a lot of daunting news all around the globe, around all sorts of disasters happening, and have observed the impacts of them on the societies. And there is no place in the world that we can say in one way, in shape or form, hasn't been affected by some sort of disasters, basically. I'm not going to go through all of them, but perhaps the one I can pick, and is the closest one we all have seen, that is this recent flooding in Valencia in Spain, following a very hot high temperature during summer, which now is becoming more and more common, is a common norm now. And followed by the winter and the consequence of that, the piled up cars. And I think when you look at it, if you don't know this is Valencia, sometimes you feel you're watching, this is one scene from these movies on superpowers or something, that cars stacked up like that. And you never forget that. Roads, power, and water outage, building destroyed, over 150 deaths, and also millions in damages. And some impacts of that will stay in these communities sometimes forever, basically. So, if you look at that, wildfires, earthquakes, storms, and the cascading impacts of disasters becoming more and more common. Storm Bert, for example, again, all sorts of storms you hear, different names they come. Another one is a Storm Bert, again, happened in November last year, leading to widespread damages. This is interesting. This picture, I took this from a new civil engineering website, but has been shared other places and has been shared other places as well. It's interesting. When Storm Bert happened, this community back in Wales, around 10 years ago, it was the anniversary of that, November 2011, they had experienced the same thing, basically. And for them, it was just a reminder after the lessons not learned, the patterns that repeated. Again, impacts on transport, impacts on utility services, and again, on public facilities, and disturbance that it caused to the societies. Again, and that's another thing. This one is a picture from Dawlish, the train line in Dawlish. I lived for a few years in Exeter in Southwest, and I think it was 2014. Similar storms happened, and it washed up completely the flood wall and the train line. For a while, the train line was disconnected from the rest of the city. Again, in Storm Bert when it happened, you see a similar pattern, although it wasn't luckily washed off that, but you can see this is becoming more and more common. Or Storm Kathleen, again, they come with different names, causing, again, interruption to infrastructure operation, public facilities, communities, financial damages, and sometimes, unfortunately, loss of lives. Or, for example, this one is a picture from the cyber attack at Bristol Airport. I think it was in 2018 that happened, that you can see interruption to traveling and people's plans. So there are all sorts of them all around the globe. You can observe. For example, the wildfire recently in America, in California, I think we all heard about that, and the devastating impact of it. Disasters of that type, shocking, quite big, and quite visible. The impacts are quite visible. But sometimes these, I would say, so-called disasters are not that visible. Right? They happen gradually. They're quite chronic, happen gradually, and they can lead to similar impacts or consequences in one way or another. For example, the one on the top left-hand side, I'm sure you all heard about the massive giant fatberg in London sewer system that Thames Water had to tackle. Is a gradually built up fatberg and there are different reasons that why this happens. But when that happens, when there is a rain, even it might be a normal rainfall, not with even extreme ones, but because the water doesn't have any space, enough capacity to get into the sewer system, there's a massive fatberg. You will see a flooding some sort, scattered flooding here and there, sewer flooding. So there's not that, my point is there's not one single reason for that. So Thames Water spends around £1 million a month on blocking fatbergs from London sewers. So it needs a lot of effort, and it's not just Thames Water, it's a shared responsibility of communities, how we behave, how we live. Or, for example, population growth and overcrowded trains. Or this one, for example, in the middle, shared by a stormwater shepherd, there's a lady called Jo Bradley, that outfalls from, for example, she measured and works on the outfall from M6 runoffs that discharges to a close by river, highly polluted, with heavy metals, microplastic, and you name it, and it's leading to the pollution of surface water. And you all have heard enough about water pollution in our surface waters, basically. This is another challenge, may not be visible, may not be achieved as a massive flooding, you may see that, but certainly that's happening. That's the damage that is happening, in my view, equally important. Or gradually temperature rise and the buckling of the rail lines. How many times you've heard this the past few years that some train lines during the peak temperatures, they don't work, or temporarily, for example, suspended, mainly because there's a possibility of buckling, or there is a buckling that is not safe for the trains to commute, basically, simply because we haven't adapted to this temperature. These are also gradually becoming more and more common and can become equally disturbing and important. Going back a bit of an international vision, I'm sure some of you, all of you have seen United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, UNDRR. Lots of interesting materials there, for example, around infrastructure resilience, and that resilient infrastructure is an indispensable foundation for achieving sustainable development, which UN is advocating for sustainable development, all 7 SDGs. And a lot of interesting points, for example, is statistics globally shared around that. For example, say 88% of infrastructure accounts for the vast majority of the forecasted global adaptation costs. So while we are very distracted and focused on mitigation aspect, it's important to remember adaptation is important too. And also, again, failure to act on ecosystem rehabilitation is costing $20 trillion to the global economy in lost ecosystem goods and services. Ecosystem biodiversity losses also are equally important, and this is something that we need to remember. There are other aspects in this sport that are important. I'm not planning to bring everything, but from an international UN perspective, again, there are a lot of interesting information, and you may want to visit UNDRR's page for that. So I'm going to share my experiences through these 5 bullets that you can see. I'll quickly touch base on what do we mean by urban infrastructure or urban infrastructure design, a bit about resilience framework, I talk about it, my journey around that. What does rethinking mean, as I indicated in the topic of my talk? A few international examples, I would like to share those lessons with you. Hopefully you find them useful. And also, finally, the key messages, the takeaways from today. And it's important to have a definition for infrastructure, because different contexts, urban planners, architects, engineers, social scientists, we may define infrastructure in a different way. There's nothing wrong with that, depends on the context. A few of the examples in the country, for example, National Infrastructure Commission, if you haven't visited the site and you would like to look into the infrastructure context, I would recommend you take a look. It defines it as basic physical and organizational structures and facilities needed for the operation of a society or enterprise. Or, for example, National Infrastructure Delivery Plan classifies them in 2 categories: economic infrastructure, transport, energy, water, waste, etc., and social infrastructure, education, health, justice, science, research, science and research infrastructure, and so on. Or, for example, UN defines that as national infrastructure consists not just physical assets, that engineers are more interested in that aspect, but physical assets that deliver essential products and services, but set of systems, organization, processes, technologies that enable critical services to be delivered. This is important, inclusively and fairly, regardless of where you are. So, on that note, it is perhaps reasonable to say that we define urban infrastructure here to essential physical and organizational structures need for a city to function efficiently, deliver what it is expected to deliver. We can have different categories for that: transport, utility, communication, social infrastructure. We have green and environmental infrastructure. Again, this is an emerging area, green and environmental infrastructure. And finally, smart and digital infrastructure. We live in an era of technology, so we need to acknowledge and appreciate that. So on that note, then, it brings me to the first slide on the resilience framework. What you're going to see in the next 2-3 slides about resilience framework are based on a project I was involved. That was my first time getting involved closely with the concept of resilience. I was a research fellow at the University of Exeter after my PhD. It was a 5-year EPSRC funded project, a fellowship of Professor David Butler in the center, which aimed to, again, develop a sustainable and resilient solution for air and water. I'm talking about 2013, 12 years ago, for air and water management at the time of global uncertainty. And that was a time at the time that a lot of research, extraordinary, fantastic research that exists now, they didn't exist at the time. So it was an era that we were trying to develop that. So we started from scratch in that project. I was involved in the first 2 years of the project. Project was between 5 to 6 years. I was involved in the first 2 years. So what I'm reflecting on are based on my involvement with that, but the project continued. And if you are interested to know more about it, because the concepts are not just water system, really, you can replicate that for any system. I recommend you to take a look and read about that. And you can find it on the website of Center for Water Systems and their publication. So the idea in there is that as an engineer, when I design, civil engineer, when I design, for example, a reservoir, a dam, a bridge, a flood wall, any structure I design, I define a design life for that. A certain type of loading condition that the system can function safely without expected and deliver the expected service without being failed or getting failed. This is pretty much 19th, early 20th century approach that I want a fail-safe system, reliable system. But we're facing a lot of uncertainties. Mother Nature is much more powerful than us. A lot of unexpected things that happen that may not allow us. And how much you want to build on a flood wall, how tall it can become. You can't just put it onto that on and on and on. So at some point, it's not even feasible, it's not possible, it's not viable to do that. It's not even affordable. So you're gradually moving to an area that you gradually accept failure in your system. It may happen, right, at some point, and you prepare yourself for that failure. How you approach it, how you tackle it, how you minimize the impact of it. So get ready for that. So gradually from fail-safe performance approach, you move towards safe-to-fail approach. So you accommodate that. That's the whole argument around resilience. So from reliability, we come to resilience. And again, resilience is a term, can mean different things to different people. We have different types of it, different perception of it. This is what we established in this project. Hopefully you find it also adaptable to the context that you want. And this concept, we published a paper. I put the DOIs and the topics over there. So we defined reliability. Again, this is a sort of engineering definition for that. Reliability addresses performance within the design life. In engineering, we design the buildings, structures, infrastructure for a certain design performance. Design life of the system, and during periods in which the required level of service, 24/7, minimum 40 PSI, water delivered at your top. That's the service you're expecting, and so on. Level of service is expected to be met when subject to standard loading, what I have designed. I predicted everything. That's how, under this condition, it can function well. In other words, reliability-based design aims to provide fail-safe performance. It tries to avoid failure. While in resilience, is opposite. So it relates to performance during the design life, but addresses performance during periods in which the required level of service is not met. So it embraces failure, it acknowledges that. But at the same time, and when subject to any threat. And resilience-based design, therefore, aims to overcome failure, not avoid, overcome that. And ensures that the system is safe to fail. It's preparing that for those moments that are not desirable, but they are inevitable. It happens. And finally, sustainability is more of an overarching concept. So it relates to level of service provision and social, environmental, and economic consequences in the long term. Therefore, I don't tend to read the entire thing, but I'm just trying to give you a perspective that in that sense, then resilience can have two dimensions. It is very important we have clarity on that. Dimensions of resilience, this is how we, in Safe and Sure, we sort of explored that. It can be attribute-based resilience, means that will be the so-called general resilience, and that's interesting. That refers to the state of the system, could be any system, that enables it to limit failure duration and magnitude. When failure happens, you want to minimize the duration and magnitude, that, isn't it? To any threat. This is the so-called general resilience. It is called the so-called all hazards approach. You can't make a prediction. Hazards can happen. Anything can happen. They can even interact. They can happen at the same time. It's so complex. So you need to prepare your system for any scenario. And it concerns the system as a whole. It typically, but not exclusively, is descriptive in its nature. And could be considered as a set of design principles, for example, degree of interconnectivity, duplication, redundancy, and so on. This is what we call it. It is close to the concept of design resilience, what we call it. Well, it can have, you can have another dimension to that, which is very common, performance-based, what we call it, which it can be translated as specified resilience. In this one, refers to an agreed performance. With the operators of infrastructure, you agree on the performance. What is a desirable performance? What is the level of service? It can be a whole system. It could be a part of a system, depending on your context. In limiting, again, failure duration and magnitude for a particular event. So it is more focused, is more prescriptive. And is prescriptive, and it can be translated as operational resilience. And therefore, at the top, as you can see here, two things need to be clarified. Simple question, ask yourself when you're dealing with that. If resilience is minimizing failure duration and magnitude, if you want to quantify it, therefore, when you are dealing with general resilience, you want to make it resilient to anything. Ask yourself, resilience of what? Define the system and design it based on being resilient to any threats. You prepare the system for that context. What happens? What do you do? While the specified resilience, which is more common because it's very operational, resilience of what, with what system, to what? So that needs to be clarified. These are the two things that you need to clarify. Resilience, a resilient system can have different attributes. Again, redundancy, integration, flexibility, etc. is part of it. And the reason I've shown these two benchmarks in engineering, water engineering, and they're called C-Town, is a benchmark model. And that's exactly what we're trying to sort of identify, decentralize things and looking into different contexts. I'll come back to that later. Again, this has been published, and if you want to know more about it, I'll be quick on this one. This is a graph I developed that shows, again, resilience performance curve, basically. It shows quality of performance of any system. You can define it anything you want versus time. And what we defined here, this line, horizontal line, dashed line, shows those defined level of service, what we say, or performance you're expecting. This is the minimum you're expecting. After that is not desirable, or the so-called system will never recover. This is a level of service. This is the one that anything above that is desirable. You want it. But if it's below that, it's acceptable, but it's not desirable. And this is 100% performance of the system. For example, again, it could be in water systems, could be a 24/7 water pressure. It could be a quality of the water. It could be the number of passengers in the service, etc. The system functions 100%. Something happens. System may continue to function a little bit, right? I don't know, water comes out of a sewer system, gets full. water gets to the manholes. It still is not surcharged. It's still in manhole, but it's getting gradually close to flooding. And then flooding happens. Water comes out, which is not desirable. So the performance of the system starts dropping. How quickly it goes down, how much it goes down, how stiff it goes down. Again, it becomes very can be quantified. All depends on how prepared your system is, how much redundancy you have in place, how much strength you've got in your system. The shape of this graph will be different. Up to a point, minimum point that it can get, that system starts to recover to go back up. System may continue to go down. After this point, we say the roof has come down. There is no recovery. There is no go back. System will shift to a different regime, basically. But it can recover and go back depending on how much resources you have, how prepared you are, and all of that. So this depth is how prepared you are, right? Conceptually, or theoretically, that's how we explain it. Sometimes you may recover and go back, and this time that it takes for you to recover, again, depending on how resourceful you are, how prepared you are, how much knowledge you have, and so on. Again, it may go back and even perform better. Sometimes it's just desirable. Sometimes even it's going to be poorer than when it was initially, which is not, again, as a positive thing. But again, this is a theoretical thing, and you can apply this to any system that you want. Safe and Sure eventually developed the framework that resilience, if you want to plan, design for resilience, is not a top-down only, is not a bottom-up only, is a circular approach. In any system you want to consider, you always have a threat or threats, right? Something that can trigger that. Could be actual, could be likely. When you're planning that. There is a system, in this case could be water system, but you can have any system. There is a system that is threatened by that likely or actual threat. And this system has certain conditions. I may have an aged asset, as I just mentioned about the sewer blockage, for example. The state of this system also matters. When this happens, threats the system, and it's going to have some impact on the system. In other words, if I have a sewer blockage, I have a normal rain or maybe average rain, there's going to be a flooding. Therefore, flooding is the impact of that rain as a result of system being in that state of, or on its path to become failed, because the system is either aged or not poor, not well maintained. And the consequence of that will be public discomfort, depending on how big it is. So it differentiates between impact and consequence. In terms of intervention, what do you do about it in this resilience framework? That is part of the process. Interventions have 4 categories. We have mitigation, means reducing that threat in shape and form that you can. Again, it could be a larger scale. This carbon emission reduction can sit nicely in that mitigation category, for example. You adapt to the impact that it has on the system. And communities, societies, etc., needs to cope with those consequences. A lot of planning around the coping mechanism. This is merely social scientists who come and play, better prepared, better protected. And what we learn from that for the future. This is very important. We learn a lesson. I don't want to go on and on. Again, these have been published, for example, in Global Challenges Journal. You can look at that, and there are more explanation and examples over there. And again, I'm not going to read or go through this. Again, in that paper, you will see categorization. We study delve into different types of threats you may have, internal, external. It could be chronic, gradual. It could be acute, like a shock. And also about the state of the system, impact, and consequences. And if you are interested, I recommend you to read them. That was Safe and Sure. Keeping that in mind, it brings me to the second project I was involved. This project was funded by Natural Environment Research Council in collaboration with Transport Scotland, SSE, Southern Scottish Energy, Scottish Water, and also Atkins. I was a co-I in the project. My colleague currently at the university, she was the PI. We looked into, well, infrastructure systems are interconnected, okay? For water system, transport system to function, they need power, energy, they need an ICT system, isn't it? Telecommunication. What if one of those transmission lines provides energy for transport, gets interrupted, damaged, right? What happens? It's going to suspend the transport, isn't it? Like that cyber attack in Bristol Airport I mentioned. So the impact of that cascading impact on the interconnected system sometimes is so complex, is very complex. And how you plan for intervention, even complicated. That's why there are not many research in these areas. There are many, but not comparing to many others. Anyway, in this project, the idea was to work with these partners in Scotland, as I mentioned, to capture when an interdependent asset fails, how failure is propagated across the whole network, interconnected network, and how it affects the resilience of the system. What can we do about this? How should we intervene? Better understanding. We developed a prototype, a small spreadsheet-based network, totally made up, water energy transport. And I tried to mimic the behavior based in a simple network. We fail a node and then see how it's going to impact the others. Sort of a bit of warm-up, this was. Then we developed, and the case study we picked, it was in Scotland, North Argyll in Scotland, mainly because this is a very good example of isolated communities when disasters happen. If you look at the map of the UK, a part of the case study was in Scotland mainland, and two sort of like islands, they're connected through ferry lines. So we had energy system, water system and transport, all three modes, railroad and ferry system. And in stormy time on, for example, the sea, obviously you can imagine these islands are quite isolated from the mainland. So what do you do about this? So it's a very good example to study that for this. Longer story short, we modeled these networks in the form of nodes and links, as you can see here. For example, a node in water system can represent a pump station or transport like a train station, and the links could be a rail line, for example, or a pipeline or something. So that's how we sort of modeled it. And then adopting the same approach, the same graph I presented just a few minutes ago in Safe and Sure, in terms of how we capture, how we model resilience conceptually, same approach applied in terms of performance indicator, number of users being in service. And then we looked into model that and we measured the resilience. So again, this has been published. I don't tend to go into details of it, but what we did in the end, in order to identify, okay, you capture, you identify, what do you do about it? Is at the end of it is all about intervention. How you're going to fix it, right? So we identified based on which part of the network, based on so many failure scenarios we tried. We tried every single node in the system, all right? We tried many scenarios in here to identify zones or areas, what we called it interdependency clusters, failure propagation zone, to identify which areas are the most vulnerable. The darker areas, it shows the more vulnerable areas, means this accumulation of density of the assets that have a high potential to get failed, basically. And then that's where plans priority decision-making kicks in, because it helps you to just identify those hottest spots or vulnerable areas. This is very important. Also the model has been deposited to Daphne. Daphne is data analytic facility for national infrastructure in the UK. You find very interesting, and I'm sure Cambridge is a member there, that you can access those databases and see what's going on. We developed a web tool for that the user can play with the network and do a bit of a sort of testing in there. I have a video, a very quick video for that. I don't tend to go to the end of it, that user can select and fail any asset, any node that he or she wants, and then see how it's going to propagate, which part of the network. Those red bits shows the areas that's been propagated and measures the resilience. It's not the best way of looking at, isn't it? But I'm conscious of time, but that was eventually the web tool we developed in order to look at that in a more of an interactive way. That brings me to the rethinking aspect of it. So these two on the resilience framework, when it comes to rethinking this, what does it mean? Rethinking theoretically or rethinking a design involves, for example, evaluation, innovation, and improving in existing concepts, practices, and so on. There are certain stages around any rethinking. You need to reframe your problem, better re-understand your problem. User-centric perspective, that's required. Needs a bit of systems thinking if it's not in place. Innovation and creativity is at the heart of it. Design principles and aesthetic, functionality, usability, and all of that needs to be considered in a design. Material consideration, again, economic viability of that also matters. And finally, the feedback loops, iterative process of testing and receiving feedback and improving it. Therefore, when you put it in the context of resilience, message is clear and simple. Shifting from traditional reactive approach, well, when something happens, then we respond to that. Let's move to more proactive approach, adaptive, integrated. Think holistically about something and get prepared for that. So the proactive approach is about controlling the situation by preventing the disaster or minimizing the impact, while the reactive approach is more about regaining the control. You already lost it, you want to regain. So it's better to be in this first state. This is a very good example of a reactive approach, get stuck in the storm. This one is a very interesting one. Some of you may have seen that. This was a guy that lives close to or next to River Sever. As you can see, is in the flood zone, gets flooded. He built his own flood wall around his house, right? And I think it was in 2016, it was saying that from and over years that he has built that 10, 11 times he has been flooded, he has been safe. This is an example. I'm not saying that is the best thing possibly. People sort of act themselves, but it's a very good example of a proactive approach, somebody to protect himself. One of the key elements of rethinking is multifunctional design. This is something that becomes more and more a common theme. Very good example of that is Eden Dock in London's Canary Wharf, is in the flood zone of Thames River. And the area designed this way is a fantastic, aesthetically, is quite beautiful in terms of harmony and all of that. Great place for social interaction. Air quality is fantastic. It's quite a pleasant place to be. But at the same time, during the flood time, it contains the water, stores the water. So it's primarily the main functionality is around water flood storage. Or for example, this one, I took this picture in Brazil, in the project we were involved. It may not be super obvious, I'm not a best photographer, but this is like a basketball pitch and quite deep. And because the area is in a flood prone area and quite steep, during the dry periods, it's used for sport activities by teenagers, but during the flood time, and there are a number of them, is a storage space to just reduce the water volume of water that comes out down the hill in there, which is very interesting. And also, again, dual purposes, for example, again, dual use solar farms that allow also agricultural activities. And there are plenty of examples out there. Use of nature-based solutions, blue-green infrastructure, pretty much what we did to the nature, we're trying to reverse. That's what we're doing. And they're becoming more and more common. Any new development needs to have nature-based solutions thought in place to tackle the stormwater. And it's not just flood, water quality, biodiversity, and amenity and social aspect also at the heart of it. I recommend you look at the SODS Drain website, which gives you plenty of information about these systems that are becoming more and more common, like these green bridges that in A556 Green Bridge is like a winter wonderland built because you cut through with a highway through the nature and you try to preserve the functionality for other species living in the area. Or this is a floodable park, becoming again more common. During the dry period, they use for recreational activity, anything. But in fact, they are in flood zone, they can store the water during the wet period. This is in Toronto in Canada, and there are plenty of other examples. Smart and adaptive systems, again, in your rethinking, adaptability and technology also, make use of AI, machine learning, also IT-enabled sensors to provide better services, again, is another thing in our rethinking, we need to embrace that. Very good examples are pretty much in monitoring infrastructures, condition or state in terms of any structural or functional defects that in buried infrastructure is difficult to see that. Technology has enabled us quite a lot to get on top of that, and the sector is evolved. Or the other one is the researchers, the digital twin of decarbonization in transport sector in the UK that University of Cambridge is involving also in this partnership. It's Center for Sustainable Road Freight. They are involved. Or even the smart waste collection, for example. Again, these are the other interesting factors that you can leverage AI or technology for better designing. Never forget community and stakeholder engagement. This is perhaps something that we need to embrace, and I'm sure you've seen that quite a lot. The citizen science, this program, this concept of citizen science becoming more and more common. Public get involved, trend get involved, of data collection, for example, water quality samples. In one of the bit we are writing, for example, we are embedding the citizen science as assets that can support pretty much what we do. In your rethinking, think about it. And again, community-driven architecture, building spaces for social interaction and so on, or waste collection, for example. I'm sure you've seen that. So this is very important. They are the enablers. They are enabling arms. Decentralization and redundancy, which basically, instead of relying on one central system, when it fails, the entire service is going to be lost. Larger scale, gradually you try to redistribute that. And this is something in rethinking, think about it. You create parallel system, and if one fails, not the entire system can get failed. A good example of that, for example, is this Beddington Zero Energy Development, BEDZ, which again is in suburb of in London, and it's just about large enough sort of community on-site water treatment and wood chip fuels combined heat and power plant. So it's a very interesting example of a partly self-sufficient community. Or in terms of food chain, even at the heart of London, you've got Hackney City Farm, for example, if you put it in that context. Or Finehorn Eco Village in Scotland that is has a decentralized water system. And basically, pretty much everything is localized, wastewater treatment, reuse system, and so on. Beyond physical infrastructure, there are a lot of other communities, groups are involved, like local resilience forums, again, is a very, very important one. Sort of like a multi-agency partnership, brings together local authorities, emergency services, healthcare providers, community groups, supported by government to sort of standardize their practice. And we've got in Essex, I'm based in Chelmsford, we've got Essex Resilience Forum. And in Cambridge, you've got also Cambridge Peterborough Local Resilience Forum as well. Again, they do quite a lot of interesting things you may want to look at. Or Agar, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, Borough Estate Regeneration Project is a passive house, partly passive house social housing in London Borough of Camden that, again, designed to tackle or reduce food poverty, and again, is a passive house design. Risk-based and adaptive planning, again, another rethinking factor, shifting from reactive to proactive, risk-informed preparation. Again, when you're design the area to tackle the risk and be risk aware, and again, use technologies based on different risks, use technology to test and model that, and then see what happens. And again, very good example of that, a globally leading example, in fact, is a climate adaptation strategy is Thames Estuary 2100, that you can see 321 billion worth of property asset, 1.42 million people are protected by this project through different barriers, flood walls, embankments, etc., that are involved in this. Community-centric and inclusive design, be inclusive around what you do. A very good example of this community-based adaptation is Bristol, disaster resilient urban planning. Bristol, in 100 cities, 100 Cities Resilience, Bristol Resilient Cities Network, 100 Resilient Cities Network. Bristol is one of the case studies. If you visited 100 Resilient Cities website, take a look. You find a lot of interest, especially if you're in architecture planning background. You'll find useful information and look at their Bristol strategy, resilience strategy, particularly from a community perspective. Even also London, you can find this from London as well, and a lot of other cities around the globe. Materials is something I'm sure is quite relevant to this department. Materials, structure, and design, all of this. For example, the idea of floating homes in flood zone area. We want to have something, but at the same time is in the flood zone. So floating homes might be an option. Or, for example, for wastewater treatment plants, you don't want them to get flooded, isn't it? Flood protection, raised levees, and somehow protect these areas to adapt them. Or after Grenfell Tower, I'm pretty sure there were a lot of lessons there. Standards and regulations changed, basically. Integrated mobility and emergency response network. Again, an analysis at the heart of disaster planning, emergency responses. This is again important. Engagement in local communities, having some guides, and even hospitals, for example, can have some review chambers for large operations, for example, as part of it. Or, for example, it was saying that I just found this sort of by chance. St. Thomas NHS Foundation Trust has become, with the help of Clark Energy, one of the first healthcare trusts in London to produce its own electricity heat through cogeneration, basically, to make it to some extent so sufficient when disasters kick in, because that's an area or building that most people go. I just want to draw your attention just to this slide about resilience framework from a National Infrastructure Commission perspective. That's the framework, National Infrastructure Commission, that's the document, has proposed all the stages of anticipation, resistance, absorb, recover, adapt and transform that you saw on the graphs I presented. That's the framework that they have proposed. At that level, you may want to take a look at that. That can be adapted to pretty much any context. You can easily Google and find that on the website. That brings me very quickly on my last few slides. The first international experience I had, and it's a very interesting one, is around resilient favela communities in Sao Paulo. Are you familiar with favela communities? So, these particular ones are the ones that they're living in the city of Sao Paulo by the river bank, is in the flood zone. Time to time, if flooding happens, wash off the community, lots of that. People basically washed off, they lose their life, and they come back to the same spot. So there's become a huge challenge for the council or the municipality to tackle and move them around and to keep them somewhere safe, to minimize the risk and impact of it. Finally, and I'm going to explain that shortly how, they managed to find some champions and build trust with these communities. So it's not an easy thing to just show up in the community and you want to collaborate. It's not like that. You need to build trust with those communities, find champions and willingness to change. This is how it looks like. It used to be a natural river, interrupted with a lot of concrete. And in the middle of the channel, you see again concrete walls. Right, so this is the main channel obstruction. People tried planning their own drainage system, sort of community living along, and this is how it looks like, the community. Lots of natural stream discharging into the river, completely blocked. That's what you see, and the waste and pollution issues and all of that, no need to explain. And this was a collaboration based on that Alliance for Water Sensitive Design that I said I'm sharing, and this is the team I'm working on that. What we did in this project, the team in Brazil built a trust with these communities, also finding right champion in municipality willing to change, this guy, very keen to make a difference in these communities, finding a trustee in these communities, identify 3 spots that these communities, that they were prioritized for being replaced or moved somewhere else for to improve these communities. But it wasn't just by force to moving them. Working with these communities, they had a sense of belonging, and moving them and to somewhere else, somewhere safer, with their collaboration. So we did a 10 days, almost 10 days summer school in Brazil. A multidisciplinary team came together, students closely involved, again, multidisciplinary, and then a lot of site visits, a lot of sketches and all of that by architects and also urban planners, and also modeled by engineers, proposing how we can move things, not just designing, but how you can implement that. And finally, we presented that 7 teams, I think we had around 5, 6 or 7 teams, and then presented that to the council. Some of the design, proposed designs were selected for implementation by the council. And there is always a final photo, isn't it? We're willing to do that. So, and again, we picked up a number of things like capacity building and education, particularly at the heart of it. So the project, as far as I'm aware, has gone through the implementations and currently with the municipality. But what they achieved with those favela communities, establishing the trust, is very, very important. I think possibly the main achievement to make a difference to those communities. The second project was, again, another resilient community in Sao Carlos. Sao Carlos is southwest of Sao Paulo, southwest of Brazil. This was a project that it's not a huge catchment. It's a river in a very steep area. One side of the valley, there are, again, favela communities, completely opposite community, gated communities on the other side. So two contradictory society you've got that share a river, share the same challenge. The natural river concreted, as you can see, completely interrupted, poorly maintained assets, and you will face annual flood. I might be able to run one of these. This is a kind of worth of, I don't know, in 2 hours, I think it was in February 2020, in 2 hours, a massive rain happened that, in 2 hours rain, this is what you see. Yeah. Completely filled with water. So that's exactly the case study we were looking into that. So for that community also, we did the same thing. We implemented a lot of nature-based solutions. We modeled the area and considered low-cost options that those favela communities also can afford to look after it. And I wish I could share more, but again, that was another example that we collaborated with community to do it. The third example is the following the central Italy, 2016 central Italy's earthquake. We visited the area. We have an international, we formed an international disaster resilience network at ARU, partnership with the different countries I mentioned at the start. We visited these sites 9 years after, I mean, it was last year, yes, 8 years after the earthquake, and still a lot to go, but a lot of lessons learned. For example, they learned that how to protect the infrastructure when you are in an earthquake-prone area. They're still building the hospital, completely brand new hospital in the area. They're recovering. Some areas in Akumuli, more or less similar areas, are still recovering, and still communities after 8 years they've left. A lot of changes have happened, and they were struggling to have some get the communities, people come back. That buy-up factor post-disaster is a huge challenge. Again, the same community, for example, this one that is a new way of life, people living here. Again, people are happy where they are, possibly, and then if they want to be relocated again to new areas, we don't know. But certainly this was something interesting, that life moves on. And also that was, again, the museum there that tried to recover how it looked like before that, the community looked like before that. And again, post-earthquake 2009 in L'Aquila, again, same central Italy, again, we visited the area, the museum destroyed, and the cultural heritage in a country like Italy that has such a rich cultural heritage history. This is very, very important, how things being looked at. And again, the team that we collaborate with them. Yeah, that's the team and the conference with it. We are still working cultural heritage, healthcare, and infrastructure, 3 themes that we are involved. And my last slide, key messages, takeaway from today. I know I've run over my time, but was excited to share all of these. Embed resilience as a fundamental design principle. Prioritize proactive over reactive. Prepare for uncertainty by designing adaptable system. Differentiate between new normal and extremes. Some of the things used to be extreme, now are new normal. We need to identify that. This is what NIC mentioned. Multidisciplinary collaboration is key. Stakeholder community engagement must be at the heart of the planning. Understand communities' needs and priorities. Talk to them. Identify community incentives for long-term, if you're expecting a long-term resilience, that buyout factor, those champions. Identify and manage interdependencies, understand trade-offs, where there are paradoxes. You need to identify, you need to acknowledge, understand them. Plan for system-wide impacts, not just localized fixes. Prioritize progress over perfection. There is a famous saying, perfection is the enemy of completion, isn't it? So incremental improvements matter. Research and innovation are essential for long-term resilience. Education and capacity building should be our lasting legacies. This is important. And communicate resilience gaps clearly to decision makers and communities. Finally, securing sustainable funding. It always finishes with some sort of funding. And I think that's all from me. Sorry, I know I ran over time, but I was so excited to share the news, the insights and messages. Thank you, everyone, for listening.